Tonight, bring it on.
24 seasons in the making.
This is going to definitely be our year, without a doubt.
The Raptors vow to dethrone the reigning champions. What awaits Canada's team in the NBA Finals?
I've said I'm keeping my options open.
Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott say they will reveal their political plans tomorrow. What CBC News has learned tonight about their futures in politics.
You just said blow harder, blow harder. I said, I'm blowing as hard as I can, sir.
A breathalyzer initially cost him his license and his car, but he hadn't had a drop to drink. He's not the only person this happened to. This is The National. A city still in celebration tonight, a nation of fans hungry to make history, and a team on the brink of unprecedented glory. For the first time in franchise history, the Toronto Raptors are going to the NBA Finals.
Hill, shot doesn't go. 24 seasons in the making.
And with that, the Raptors ventured into a brand new world, elating tens of thousands of die-hard fans who spilled out into the streets, celebrating well into the night. And despite scenes like this, remarkably not one arrest to report, another testament to the positive energy gripping the city. Natalie Nanowski now with what lies ahead for the Raptors and their fans.
They still can't believe what they're seeing.
That's going to be on replay all day.
Barber Lowell Stevens has been behind the Raptors since they first hit the court in '95. And before yesterday's game, he even stopped into church.
It's one of the first things, like, Lord, protect me, forgive me for my sins, let the Raptors win.
The Toronto Raptors are headed to their first NBA Finals.
And lightning did strike. The city is still floating on that high.
And it was just no words. You know, you just have to feel it. You gotta let it overwhelm you.
Raps fans have a breather for a few days before the next wave of excitement, no matter where they watch.
We have the ritual now that we all watch it together.
The next game is Thursday here in Toronto, with the Raptors going up against the Golden State Warriors.
But the Raps have their work cut out for them. The Warriors are NBA champs 2 years running. Still, those in the know think Toronto has a good shot.
When you look at their playoff performance against Orlando, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, they just keep getting better and better. Their defense has been stellar, and offensively, I think they're really figuring it out.
The team's momentum over the last few years has only raised the sport's profile in the country.
Basketball was already the fastest growing sport amongst our youth.
With an All-American Stanley Cup, the Raptors have become Canada's team with this year's historic run.
The focus is going to be on Canada for the next 2 weeks. It's the first time that the NBA Finals is going to be played outside of the United States, so that's a big deal.
It's certainly a big deal back at the shop.
You know what? It's so funny. They're not good enough to be in the finals. They're good enough to win.
We'll find out starting Thursday. Natalie Nanowski, CBC News, Toronto.
So you heard Natalie there talking about how that deeply personal connection to the Raptors isn't just limited to supporters in Toronto. Kayla Hounsell explores how the team has inspired kids right across the country to believe in themselves.
Every day after school, these kids show up at the community YMCA to play basketball. But before they even hit the gym, they stop to check their NBA pool.
We got the Raptors. We got the Raptors in the finals.
It's something program director Stephen Nelson created to keep them engaged.
This is where they stop, they congregate, they talk about the last night game, the game tonight, the game tomorrow, and it's just great to watch.
The reality is the kids don't need much encouragement to talk about the game these days. The Toronto team is pretty much all they're talking about.
They're putting Canada on the map, I guess, so people are going to start to look more to Canadians for some basketball things now.
16-year-old Christian Johnson Beals says the team's success in the Eastern Conference Final inspires him.
It just makes me want to improve, get to that level, be able to play with those guys.
The Raptors making international headlines is also helping staff here at the Y enforce the values they try to teach every day. Hard work, persistence, dedication.
Those guys aren't there just because they come into the gym once a week. They work hard. They work 7 days a week on their game. And that's how hard you need to work to reach that level of basketball expertise. And you must put the same amount, equal amount of effort into your schoolwork.
Kawhi Leonard.
He says watching the Raptors play gives the kids a vision.
Got it!
Across town at Dartmouth High, they're also keeping a close eye on the Raptors.
It brings me a lot of motivation because, it's local. It's not like I'm trying to go somewhere far like America or overseas or whatever. It's right here in Canada.
And no matter where they play, they all have the same favorite player.
Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi Leonard.
It's Kawhi Leonard!
One player, it seems, inspiring a generation of players far beyond Toronto city limits. Kayla Hounsell, CBC News, Halifax.
And for Kawhi Leonard fans hoping to see him live this Thursday, tickets don't officially go on sale until Monday, but resellers like StubHub are already hawking seats, and it will cost you. As of this evening, a spot in the 300 section will run you anywhere from $1,100 to $1,300. A little closer to the action in the 100s, you're looking at $1,700 to $5,000. And for those who want to see the game the way Drake does, courtside between the benches, you can take out a second mortgage and get courtside north seats for a mere $82,000. Now to a developing story out of Ottawa. CBC News has learned new details tonight on what to expect tomorrow when former Liberal MPs Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott reveal their plans for their respective political futures. Hannah Thibodeau is breaking the story for us tonight.
CBC News has learned that Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott will not be running as Green candidates in this fall's election. Both Wilson-Raybould and Philpott had several conversations with Elizabeth May, the Green Party leader, about potentially running for her party.
Thank you.
Wilson-Raybould also attended May's wedding in Victoria at the end of April, and that stoked rumors that she might jump to the Greens.
I've said I'm keeping my options open. I've had several conversations with Elizabeth. No decision's been made yet.
Wilson-Raybould currently sits as an independent MP for Vancouver-Granville, and Philpott is an independent for Markham-Stouffville. The two women quit the Liberal cabinet over the government's handling of the SNC-Lavalin affair, and the Prime Minister announced he was kicking them out of the Liberal caucus shortly after. If they had gone to the Greens, May would have had some extra horsepower heading into this election season. And the Green movement has surged recently with the election of its second MP. Paul Manley will be sworn in on Monday after winning the recent Nanaimo Ladysmith by-election. And provincially, there's been a groundswell of Green support too. Now, we're still not sure if Wilson-Raybould or Philpott will run as independents in the next election. And if they do, it could be problematic for the Liberals in those two ridings because throughout history, nearly 1/3 of MPs were successfully re-elected as independents after they left their parties. Hannah Thibodeau, CBC News, Ottawa.
Jody Wilson-Raybould is expected to speak tomorrow at noon Eastern, Jane Philpott at 12:30. Watch it live on CBC News Network and online. And it is already well into Monday in Japan. That is where the U.S. president is right now, continuing his state visit, which has been full of friendly photo ops. His tweets, though, are not so friendly. As Evan Dyer tells us, they are aimed at political opponents back home.
In Tokyo, President Trump presented a trophy to the winner at a sumo wrestling match, one of several events Japan laid on to keep the U.S. president entertained during his stay. It seemed to work.
I've always wanted to see sumo wrestling, so it was really great.
A new flurry of Trump tweets caused consternation. North Korea has begun missile tests again, launching short-range rockets that could reach Japanese cities. North Korea fired off some small weapons which disturbed some of my people and others, but not me, he wrote. I have confidence that Chairman Kim will keep his promise to me. Also smiled when he called swamp man Joe Biden a low IQ individual and worse. Perhaps that's sending me a signal. Spokesperson Sarah Sanders denied Trump was again siding with an enemy dictator against an American political opponent.
Can you explain why Americans should not be concerned that the President of the United States is essentially siding with a murderous authoritarian dictator over a former vice president of the United States?
Chuck, the president's not siding with that, but I think they agree in their assessment of former Vice President Joe Biden.
But for some Republicans, the don't worry message about missile tests was too much.
I find them very disturbing and certainly wouldn't trust Kim Jong-un.
Republicans would be howling at the White House gates if this had happened by another party. So I think we can conclude that this was not appropriate.
But having dragged one of America's enemies into the election campaign on the Republican side, Trump then proceeded to do the same with his Japanese hosts and allies. Numerous Japanese officials told me that the Democrats would rather see the United States fail than see me or the Republican Party succeed. Death wish. The tweet put the Japanese in the unenviable position of saying nothing and risking their relationship with any new Democratic administration, or contradicting their guests and hurting their relationship with the current president. So far, they've remained mute. Evan Dyer, CBC News, Washington.
In Europe tonight, we are learning what hundreds of millions of people voted for in new parliamentary elections, pitched as a battle for the very existence of the EU. And Europeans seem to have gotten the message. Estimated turnout is the highest since 1994. One message voters sent back in France, in Germany, in Italy, and beyond. Nationalist parties skeptical of the EU gained ground, but not control. Now, as Thomas Dagla explains, for voters and politicians across Europe, Britain's tortured Brexit spectacle seems to have made its mark.
In France, the far-right National Rally Party declared victory, calling it a defeat for the EU.
L'Union européenne ne peut plus ignorer l'aspiration des peuples à la protection, à la liberté et à la souveraineté.
The European Union can no longer ignore the people's desire for protection, liberty, and sovereignty, said candidate Jordan Bardella. With a similar message heard in Italy, where ballots were counted well into the night. The Eurosceptic Matteo Salvini's party receiving a vote share 5 times the size it got 5 years ago.
I enjoy it.
And they've got this Brexiteer to thank. At least that's what he told us.
I've been a big force for this debate. I've helped other Eurosceptic movements around the rest of Europe spring up. You know, we really in this country have been the first.
Morning, sir.
Nigel Farage's upstart Brexit party is poised to win the most British seats in the European Parliament on the single promise to push for a divorce with no deal, an increasingly lonely position in Europe.
The Brexit mess here in Britain has made European populists elsewhere reconsider running on their own campaigns to leave. Instead, with more influence in Brussels, they now intend to undermine the EU from within.
Brexit just may have turned some voters toward the EU, including in Germany, where the pro-EU Greens made historic gains echoed elsewhere.
The green wave has really spread all over Europe. And
proving Eurosceptics aren't the only winners as voters move away from traditional centrist parties.
It's going to be harder for the EU to make decisions. There's going to be a lot more division, fragmentation.
And making this notoriously complicated parliament even harder to navigate, even less predictable. Thomas Dagg, CBC News, London.
Now back to Canada and the upcoming federal election here. A new divisive idea is emerging aimed squarely at your wallet and your waistline. Some Liberal MPs want their party to propose a new tax on sugary drinks. Katie Simpson with the plan and the politics.
What goes into your grocery cart is about to become the center of an intense political debate. Ahead of the fall election, some Liberal MPs want the party to campaign on a soda tax proposal that would make sugary drinks more expensive in hopes of getting Canadians to make healthier choices.
Having a sugar tax on sugary beverages is something that might help.
CBC News obtained a copy of a draft proposal by Ontario Liberal MPs. It says a 20% tax would generate $1.2 billion a year, money those Liberals say could be used to create a new healthy lunch program for school kids. Over 25 years, the document states the proposal could postpone more than 7,800 deaths and save Canada's healthcare system upwards of $7 billion.
It is something that would go back to helping our children. I don't know who can argue against that.
The issue with chronic disease that are diet related, these are complex problems. Complex problems don't have simple, singular solutions.
This professor says there needs to be more research on whether there are clear links between a soda tax and better health.
What these taxes are meant to do is decrease sugar-sweetened beverage consumption. That's it, that's all. Whether or not that translates into health benefits still will remain to be seen, because these taxes they're just short-lived so far.
Take the city of Philadelphia's soda tax. A study released earlier this month shows sugary drink consumption dropped nearly 40% when prices went up, but its authors needed more information about potential health impacts.
I think what it shows is what the gut initial first reaction for all of these Liberal Ontario MPs is to tax something. And they should know better.
The Conservatives would be happy to campaign against another new tax proposal from the Liberals.
Canadians do not see a taxation as a method by which to reduce or curb their consumption. We're having this discussion on the carbon tax already.
Expect to hear the Conservatives make that link as often as they can until the Liberal team makes up its mind. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Ottawa.
We're following several other developing stories tonight, starting in Toronto, where a 4-year-old boy is in critical condition after a hit and run involving a motorcycle.
The child was dragged for some distance, and eventually the child came to rest on the right side of the roadway.
Originally, police said the boy had died, but later clarified he was being treated in hospital. Investigators say this is a photo of the motorcycle. You can see both a man and a woman. The woman was last seen running away from the scene.
Potential for extreme fire behavior is very high.
And fire crews near High Level, Alberta are really worried. A shift in wind direction may just push the wildfire towards town. They are getting help from Ontario. 80 firefighters arrived this weekend. The residents who fled the fire started getting emergency funds today from the provincial government. And people are assessing the injuries and damage in Oklahoma tonight after a pair of powerful twisters hit while people were sleeping. And as Renee Filipponi explains, the area is still under threat, this time from water.
The tornadoes touched down in darkness, one around 10:30 last night in the city of El Reno, the other before dawn in a suburb outside Tulsa. The force was so strong it destroyed a motel and ripped through this mobile home park, lifting trailers off the ground.
I know trailer 80 flipped over on top of 81, which we were in. And after everything was over with and all the shaking and jarring and everybody landing on the floor, the sirens went off.
My dad lifted up part of a trailer and the roof of a trailer. He was scared.
Many people lost everything. Their homes are now just piles of rubble. And this is just the latest disaster to strike. A number of powerful storms have hit the area over the past week, including more tornadoes and deadly floods. A state of emergency is in place right across Oklahoma, and that has stretched resources to the limit.
These guys have been working their tail off now. We've gone through situation after situation after situation, and they have gone nonstop.
Adrian, at least 2 people have died and 29 others were injured in those most recent tornadoes. And there is more bad weather on the way for large parts of the central U.S. Watches and warnings were issued in at least 11 states tonight for everything from tornadoes to floods. And some residents near Tulsa are being advised to head for higher ground. The water level in the Arkansas River is so high, it's putting dangerous levels of stress on the levee system.
All right, Renee, thanks very much. Up next, a Go Public investigation why some roadside alcohol tests could be taking drivers off the road for all the wrong reasons. And Canadian whistleblower Christopher Wylie is our Sunday interview why he is still sounding the alarm.
Currently, these big tech platforms do not want to take responsibility. They want to take the data, they want to monetize you and make money off of you, but when there's a problem, they want to push it to something else.
A BC man is going public tonight, saying Canada's new impaired driving laws have left him terrified to drive at all. He has lung disease and says the new rules letting police demand a breathalyzer test, even if they don't suspect impairment, have cost him dearly. Here's Erica Johnson.
Wait, can I hold you?
Jimmy Forster has chronic lung disease, making him short of breath, and he limps from a brain injury. In March, after filling up his car at this gas station one morning, an RCMP officer pulled him over, demanded a breath test. Forster says he couldn't blow hard enough to get a reading.
He just said, blow harder, blow harder. I said, I'm blowing as hard as I can, sir. Sir, I said, I'm blowing as hard as I can. He just didn't believe me.
It's estimated there are almost 200,000 Canadians with severe asthma, 2 million with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Forster has both. In BC, anyone who refuses or, like Jimmy Forster, is unable to do a breath test has their car impounded, their license suspended for 90 days. In other provinces, it could lead to a criminal charge.
I'm scared.
It's the second time in as many months Forster hasn't been able to do a breath test. The first time, an adjudicator dismissed the case and he got his car and license back. This respirologist says it can be difficult to assess in the field whether people have chronic lung disease.
There likely are people that do have lung function that's so low that they can't do the test, and just identifying them on the spot it just seems very difficult.
Go Public has tracked down other cases in BC and Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, and New Brunswick, all people with chronic lung disease or other disabilities who say they too were unable to provide a breath test.
I'm not going to say it's easy for police at roadside to make all of these determinations, but there should be some level of inquiry in situations like this.
In a statement from the RCMP, a media spokesperson said RCMP officers use their training, experience, and judgment to identify legitimate inability to provide a breath sample. Jimmy Forster spends his days worrying his license will get pulled again.
I can't sleep at night. I cannot.
With no indication he's touched a drink. Erica Johnson, CBC News, Vancouver.
Forster cannot get his license back until June 20th, and he doesn't know, he says, if he can afford the $700 that will cost. Now remember, our Go Public stories always start with a tip from you. So if you have a story to share, please send us an email to gopublic@cbc.ca. The Sunday interview is next on The National. Tonight, it is the Canadian who told the world what Facebook is really doing with your data. And later, the moment of the weekend, the moment Raptors fans have been waiting for.
It's just an incredible feeling all around. I'm pretty sure I jumped up, ran around my kitchen island. I think I ran around my house. Like, I'm a super fan.
Of course, from Nunavut to Toronto, celebrating a historic win.
If Mr. Zuckerberg and Ms. Sandberg blow off a subpoena by the Canadian Parliament, I think it speaks to the contempt that they show for domestic legislators in the jurisdictions they're working in, and that's not acceptable.
So that was NDP MP Charlie Angus on what he says is a lack of response from Facebook's top two executives, Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg, to a parliamentary subpoena. In Ottawa, 2 days from now, they are supposed to face lawmakers from 8 countries, including Canada. The last time this grand committee met in the UK, Zuckerberg was a no-show. Famously, Facebook's motto was move fast and break things. Well, it's common now to wonder if Facebook has actually broken privacy, maybe even democracy. And a lot of that wondering began with Canadian Christopher Wylie. The whistleblower and activist warned the world about the intersection of tech, private data, and political power. And as he made clear to Ian, his work is far from over.
He was relatively unknown just over a year ago. But now, in some circles, Christopher Wylie is practically a household name. The data scientist who blew the lid off the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal, a breach that affected 87 million people. Personal information was harvested, and it was used to profile people on Facebook with political messages and disinformation. campaigns that many believe influenced the 2016 U.S. election and the Brexit vote.
I think it is completely reasonable to say that there could have been a different outcome in the referendum, had there not been, in my view, cheating.
The revelation set off a media firestorm, and suddenly Facebook seemed vulnerable. In the months that followed, Wylie has become much more than a whistleblower, but almost an evangelist for limiting the power of big tech companies like Facebook, calling for regulations, a code of ethics for software engineers, and of course, making sure all of us who use social media and tech are aware of the risks. I caught up with Christopher Wylie recently in Vancouver.
Hey, well, so thank you very much for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
And it's really interesting to finally see you in person. I feel like I know you because I've seen so much of you over the last year.
And vice versa. When I was growing up, I watched you on TV too.
Excellent.
So there we go. We finally meet.
That's right.
Yeah.
You have been at the forefront of this awakening, really, in the last 13 months. How much safer are things now than they were a year ago?
I wouldn't say that things are safer per se. I think that there's more awareness. So, the way I think about it is that a lot of these platforms, despite the fact that they talk about themselves as services with terms and conditions and opt-ins, they're not. They're architectures. In other domains where infrastructure is at play, whether that's a physical architecture or an energy infrastructure, water infrastructure, we don't talk about personal responsibility there. We talk about, is what's being built safe, right? And so what I feel like has happened with Facebook is that they've built an architecture without fire exits, right? With faulty wiring. And instead they've just said, well, we're going to put some terms and conditions on the door and let people walk in and just call it our user experience. And so I think that we really need to start having a conversation about, are the architectures that are being built, are they safe? Like the reality is that just like how electricity is absolutely essential to the functioning of a person in modern society, using the internet also is. And so people don't actually have a choice as to whether to opt in or opt out. Because if you say to a person, all right, well, if you want to protect your human rights, your privacy rights, don't use the internet. I mean, it's like saying if you don't want to be electrocuted, don't use buildings. And what I'm saying is that currently these big tech platforms do not want to take responsibility. They want to take the data, they want to monetize you and make money off of you, but when there's a problem, they want to push it to something else and say it's really complicated. And for me, when I hear that, I hear a company like Boeing say, yeah, well, aerospace engineering is really complicated and sometimes their planes fall out of the sky, right? We would not tolerate that. So, for me, Facebook's defense is the best argument to say why we should be regulating them, because it is complicated. So we need to ensure that they perform due diligence on their products before they release them to the public.
So if the government of Canada came to you, and maybe they have, and said, how do we do this properly? Because, part of this too is the internet and social media can give voice to people in a good way.
Completely.
It can break down barriers and allow freedom of expression, and presumably you don't want to restrict that unnecessarily. So what is it that needs to be regulated?
I think that actually one of the best places to start is actually not just imposing regulations on social media companies, but actually creating professional conduct standards for engineers and architects who work in software and data science, where people and professionals are not only obligated to constantly question themselves and the technologies that they're building about how it can go wrong or how it could be misused or what its impact is going to be on public health or public safety or democracy, but also empower people who see things happening inside of these companies before they're actually built, and empower them to say, no, actually, this is unethical, and empower them where they can't be retaliated against.
Let's talk about the consumers, the users, the people out there who are embracing social media.
Yeah.
I sense that some people feel paranoid about social media now. Certainly many people feel anxious. Is that how people should be feeling, the users of social media?
I think skeptical and questioning, are healthy things. I think what's important for people to really start thinking about is not just what's happening right now, but what is the trends of these big tech companies and where that might end up in 5, 10, 20 years from now. So when you look at patent applications from Google or from Facebook or Amazon, where they want to design essentially surveillance networks inside of physical constructed space, right, including in your living room, where for the first time in human history, you are sitting in your own house and you are never alone because the ambient environment is watching you, thinking about you, and constantly trying to seek to change, influence, and optimize your behavior. And if we put people in an environment where their house thinks about them and constantly talks to an ad network, and that ad network also talks to their children's toys, and that it talks to your car, and your car decides whether or not you should be on time for work depending on the subscription package that you have for the self-driving features of that car, where your refrigerator starts buying things for you, right? Where all of a sudden you become completely infantilized in your life because everything around you is thinking about you and seeking to change and influence your behavior. And I feel like that could go terribly, terribly wrong.
Are there clear do's and don'ts right now?
When you have purchased or subscribed to a smart device, service, software, platform, etc., understand that those things are often interconnected, and that what they do now is not necessarily how they want to monetize it 5, 10 years from now, right? So when you look at things like genetic tests and ancestry tests and all of that, it might be fun to see genetically where you're from in the world, but at the same time, take a step back and go, what happens if this gets integrated with an insurance company, for example, if you're in the United States, right? What if this gets integrated with some other kind of consumer credit profiling, right? What happens when actually I haven't even used this test, but my cousin has, and an insurance company then acquires that company and then profiles me via what my cousin did, right? And all of a sudden, and this is what I'm saying, is that it's actually a really hard and insidious problem, because even if you do not use a lot of these platforms or services, they still can profile you and seek to influence you. And so the thing that I would say is that if people are concerned about where we're going with technology, call your MP and tell them about it, or call Facebook and tell them about it. Tell the people who are actually making or responsible or in power to change it that you don't like where we're going.
So given everything you've experienced and seen, the good and bad, in the last year or so, do you actually think calling Facebook and or calling your MP will make a difference?
Well, if we say that, public pressure on companies and politicians doesn't work, then we've got a bigger problem, right? Then we're saying, our whole democratic process doesn't work. So I think that people need to try.
So you're optimistic. I'm sensing some optimism here.
I have to be optimistic. If I'm not optimistic, we're heading to a really terrible place, right? Have you seen the movie Wylie?
No.
So in Wylie, you've got a robot that gets sent to Earth. It's the Pixar movie, and Earth is destroyed because of climate change. And all these people now live in spaceships, and they live in these little customized entertainment pods. And they're these sort of blob-like humans that have become infantilized because, computers just show them stuff all day.
Make a place scream.
No, it doesn't sound
Look, I'm tired of it.
And I worry that that's our future. We've completely eviscerated the environment, and we've completely infantilized humans.
Okay, now you don't sound optimistic.
And so what I'm saying is that, as cute as a movie Wylie is, if you think about it, is that the future that we want? And so, we need to take a step back and go, if we don't want that, if you don't want your children or your grandchildren to live in that kind of environment, you've got to speak up, because it's the only thing that you can do, right? I think it would be unreasonable to say that people should stop using all Facebook, Instagram, Google, whatever services, because it's going to be impossible to be a functioning person in modern society. So we've got to put public pressure on and change the actual way we talk about these platforms is not these amazing things, but actually with a more skeptical eye and say, actually, what are you trying to do? What are you planning on doing 5 years from now? Why are you taking out all these patents? But this is the brilliant thing about a democracy, is that if people mobilize and put pressure on politicians, they eventually will respond. This is how the civil rights movement works. This is how a lot of social change works. So, it can be as simple as calling up your MP.
Okay, you sound optimistic again, and you also sound fascinating. Thank you very much. It's fantastic.
Thanks.
Does indeed. Up next on The National, the new medical procedure that not only helps ease discomfort for amputees, but can help them feel right through the prosthetic.
I really just want to go on walks with my family and live as normal a life as I can.
A Montreal man who lost his leg 3 decades ago can now do what so many of us take for granted. After undergoing a new procedure, not only can he walk again, he can experience the sensation of it, making him just the 3rd Canadian ever to enjoy the benefits of osseointegration. Cass Russi explains what it is and how it's changing lives.
Jason Simunik has just taken his first few steps with a cutting-edge implant that could transform his life.
How are you feeling?
There's a bit of pressure there, my hip a bit. It's new.
Getting to this point has been decades in the making.
So here's a history of my last 3 legs.
We've been following Simunik's story for over a year. At his home, he showed us reminders of a horrible car accident that happened over 30 years ago.
Oldest to newest. This is actually the most recent socket, but it's the one that didn't work out the best for me.
Simunik was only 14 when he lost his leg.
I used to bike everywhere, and skateboard was my primary means of transportation and my hobby. I was devastated when I learned that this was going to happen, and I wouldn't be able to do all these things again.
Simunik recovered, but he never got used to living with a conventional prosthetic.
I mean, quite frankly, I can't walk more than 500 or 600 meters without it causing irritation and pain.
We live in a beautiful neighborhood, and he hasn't been able to experience it the way that the girls and I have been able to.
A frustrated Simunik searched for alternatives and discovered something called osseointegration, a surgical procedure where a titanium rod-like implant is inserted directly into the patient's bone, then connected to the prosthetic limb.
Medical records. Decades of history.
But osseointegration can be expensive, costing about $50,000 per patient, and no province currently covers it. Jason almost gave up hope until he learned Quebec's public auto insurance plan would pay for his operation.
I really just want to go on walks with my family and live as normal a life as I can.
In March, Simunik was wheeled into a clinic for the surgery. It was long, over 3 hours. Dr. Robert Turcotte, an orthopedic surgeon in Montreal, is one of a handful in Canada to do the procedure. He believes it's a dramatic improvement from what's traditionally been done.
Their skin is not encased in a plastic socket, which is warm, which is painful. They don't get bruised in the grain. They don't get, skin abscesses.
Turcotte and his team insert the implant directly into Simunik's femur.
This will allow bone growth, like we do for hip arthroplasty or knee arthroplasty. The bone will fuse with the implant, make it a very strong part of your body.
6 weeks later, Simunik is now deep into rehabilitation. It's a slow process. His muscles have been weakened by years of wearing ill-fitting prosthetics. The doctor overseeing his rehabilitation says while he's progressing well, osseointegration isn't for everyone.
Patients who are diabetic or who are amputated because of a problem with blood circulation are not candidates for this technology. So it's patients who've had traumatic amputation, so from a trauma or cancers. Those are the ones that are candidates for this surgery.
Finally, the moment has come more than 30 years after his accident. A simple click changes Simunik's life.
Can you tell me about your first experience walking?
It was a totally new sensation. It's liberating in a sense to not have the socket. I felt that I have to relearn everything.
With the implant fused to his bone, Simunik can now sense surfaces like grass, sidewalks, and floors beneath his leg. It's called osseoperception.
For many years now, you haven't felt all those sensations come up.
Yeah.
And now with this new procedure, you know, the big advantage is to feel through the bone.
Yeah. Le pas.
During his time here, Simunik has been inspired by a fellow amputee who's also recovering from osseointegration surgery. The two men have bonded over their mutual physical challenges.
High five. It's really encouraging because I know that where he's at right now, I'm only probably a week out from.
But his biggest motivators are his daughters and his wife, Sarah.
This is what they've known for their whole lives, is me, right? It's being less than able. So now I'm going to be far more able to do all sorts of things with them.
Like that long overdue walk, free of pain for the first time in decades. Cass Rusey, CBC News, Montreal.
We do it all again tomorrow.
One last note on the story. Quebec recently announced it will partially fund osseointegration surgery, the first jurisdiction in Canada to do so. And in Edmonton, the University of Alberta is about to launch a pilot program with 10 patients. Another story we will bring you in the days ahead. David Common explores how elderly couples are cared for in Sweden, how they are kept together, and what lessons Canada can learn.
What in Canada is normal is almost unheard of in Sweden. Life here seems calmer. The people content. Nancy and Tolston certainly are.
What would it mean for you at this stage in your life to not be together?
Jag skulle inte känna mig lugn om jag var hemma och Torsten var här på samma sätt som. Och jag tror det skulle betyda ännu mera för Torsten att vi får vara tillsammans.
That's this week on The National. But first, in case you missed it, the date was May 26, 1969, 50 years ago, when John Lennon of the Beatles and Yoko Ono installed themselves in Montreal's Queen Elizabeth Hotel.
We're here as a protest against violence.
Their famous bed-in had begun, a call for world peace as war raged in Vietnam.
I'm using my money and my time to promote peace.
It was right there where Lennon both wrote and recorded his anti-war anthem. For a week, journalists, musicians, and fans crammed in for chats. Among them, Fred Langen from the CBC, who ended up right up front thanks to his cameraman.
He was a tough guy, big, burly guy. And when we got in the room, he said, "Get in there." As you can see in the photograph, I'm right on the bed practically.
I feel the spirit of John.
Today, that room is a destination. What happened there, so inspiring to fan Carmel Massey. He booked this room 2 years ago for the anniversary.
It's not just for celebrate, but it's for rendre hommage at John and Yoko too. Thank you, John and Yoko. Thank you for all.
It was a moment, a quarter century in the making, one that Raptors fans are still savoring tonight. But those fans aren't just from Toronto. We found Raptors fever from coast to coast to coast, and we just couldn't help ourselves. That moment is tonight's moment.
We were
down in the first quarter. We were down even in the third quarter.
Milwaukee had stretched the lead out to 15 near the end of the third quarter. It really got tense.
I kind of was like, shoot, like, so it's going to be like this again.
The defense was there, and you just needed the shots to drop.
When Kawhi came back, it was, I think, 9 minutes left in the quarter, and we took it 2 points at a time.
Kawhi, like, had that crazy dunk with his left hand, and we were like, I think we could win.
Kawhi came and took over the game.
But that dunk really just set it off, in the household, as well as all through Twitter and all through Toronto. We've got this.
It has never happened before.
I'm pretty sure I jumped up, ran around my kitchen island. I think I ran around my house. Like, I'm a super fan, so.
And here we are. Now we are in the NBA Finals.
Okay, those smiles are real and they are deserved. The woman you just saw there from Moncton, her name is Shannon Parley. Hey there, Shannon. Apparently she only travels when she's coming to Toronto for a Raptors game. That's it. She is such a super fan. She's been talking about her VHS tapes of Vince Carter. That's something. That is a national for May 26th. Good night.